Welcome back for another episode of Sunday SoulDay, fueling your mind, body, and soul with soulful conversations and life changing insights.
Welcome to Sunday Soul Day.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you for joining. I'm so eager to share your story with our audience. We talked to so many founders and so many creators. And when I came across your product, and I'm so appreciative of you reaching out and sharing it, I was blown away. So I can't wait because I think it is really important and a lot of people need to use it. So first and foremost, before we dive too deep, like I want to just hear kind of the origin story, from idea to impact. Every powerful platform kind of begins with a personal insight or even a frustration. Like, what led you to create this incredible product? And what gaps were you seeing, in how people understand and express their voice?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can go right into it. And thank you so much for having us, Damesha. It's an honor to be speaking with you and sharing our story a little bit more as well. And, the core problem that we're solving is that most of us have absolutely no clue how we sound in conversations with other people, right? We often, what you see is you kind of have an idea of what you mean to say or what your intention behind what you're saying is. But how you're actually experienced is such an invisible feedback gap across different conversations. And this gap is honestly most painstaking in these high stakes moments like board meetings, speeches, fundraising pitches, conflict resolutions. And the idea is that your tone and your energy, those carry so much weight that they actually enter the room before your words even do, right? And rooms, essentially, they're not really responding to the information, but they're responding to your nervous system. And that's that gap that we're trying to solve. And on a personal note, kind of going back into my experience in STEM, in research, I was actually a pre-med student at UPenn back in 2023. And I was studying drug discovery in clinical trials and coming up with these really cool new pathways into tackling some of the biggest challenges in the medical field. And from there, I went on to work in San Francisco for the better part of 3 years, working in drug discovery at one of those huge biotech companies down in South San Francisco. And something that I noticed, of course, really early on, actually, as I was having the opportunity to wear multiple different hats across internal stakeholders, managing scientists and engineers, and IT professionals, and then, of course, externally managing vendors and CROs, which are contract research organizations, that communication played such a fundamental role in how I was managing projects, how I was managing difficult conversations. And then that carried into my own personal kind of career pivot that I was going through at the same time as well, applying to consulting roles, having coffee chats and interviews, and always walking away so perplexed and wondering, how did I actually sound? How did they perceive me? Did I sound confident? Was I grounded? Was I polished? And these kinds of questions also carried into what Raheem was experiencing. And Raheem, feel free to share your experience as well.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think Makaeel said it best. What we like to say on our team is we really like to talk about what's called high stakes communication and conversation. And what we found is that high stakes communications really determines access to jobs, leadership, and career mobility. But feedback on how people communicate can be very informal, subjective, and inaccessible. And we found that capable individuals really lacked scalable, safe ways to improve their clarity, confidence, and presence. And when Mikhail first approached me about this idea, I was actually in the thick of applying for PhD programs. So currently, I'm a PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania studying biomedicine. And when he first approached me about the idea, I was doing my interviews, and I found that the biggest piece of advice I was receiving from mentors and peers in the field was to practice like interview questions and practice questions in the mirror the night before a big conversation. But I thought that Mikhail's idea was especially unique because it allowed people to have a mirror for their own voice, and it gave them a platform to really practice in a setting that was comfortable and mirrored what they wanted to get out of the conversation.
Yes. Oh my gosh, so beautifully articulated. And both of you, thank you for that. And also, it's so interesting when I talk with individuals about, you hear the term executive presence, right? Which I think is completely BS just between you and I, but
Mhm.
in our lovely audience, because I think it's more about not so much your executive presence, but just intentional presence and being
Yes, I
present,
agree.
and I think we get so caught up in the first word, executive, and how am I coming off and how should I do this? And people forget their voice. And I believe that the communicator, like when you're communicating with someone else, especially when it's a direct report or a subordinate of some sort, whether it's a teacher, communicating with students, or even in your own personal relationships, when you're communicating, the ownership belongs to you.
Exactly.
And that's what I think people miss because they're so hung up on how people, respond or what. But I'm like, you're trying to deliver a message. The ownership stays with you. And so why your, platform is so powerful is because people don't necessarily hear themselves and they don't hear the tone behind what they're trying to explain or the intention. They understand their intention, but they don't understand how their intention is coming across. And so I love this product for that, and our voices are so powerful, and I think we forget that too as we're talking and communicating in those high stakes moments, but also just even in our personal life, in our personal relationships. And when I first initially chatted with Makaeel, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this product is it's just like game changing." Because when I think about it, it crosses so many different, not just in professional, but also like in your personal. You think about going on dates, like,
Exactly.
and
Yes.
like, I mean, you should be partnering with dating platforms, because it's like people don't understand how they come across on those first dates, and they're trying to, impress, and they're wearing their mask, and they're doing all of these
Right, right.
things, and
We're
so
stepping into that role, but I mean,
yeah,
there's not necessarily any, intention or
yeah,
reflective layer for them to understand. Well, I
exactly.
mean, how's my game? Like, I mean, am I spitting game
Exactly.
right now? Not.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think about this even as an executive when I was working in tech, we'd have these all hands meetings where you're speaking to the entire organization, and you have a short window to get your whatever message you're trying to convey across and to have it penetrate in a way
Exactly.
that makes people move, and so many executives, sadly fail at this because they have their own agendas in their own mind, and then they're just coming across but not thinking about, like, okay, I can't, like, I'm not actually being effective. And so I really feel like this tool allows people to not only hear themselves, learn themselves deeper, but be a lot more effective in wherever they're communicating. So thank you for
Mhm.
walking us through that. Like, talk to us a little bit about, like, how the technology meets identity. Like, I know we talked a little bit about this, but it kind of helps individuals understand their voice on a deeper level, like, but also those unheard, messages behind their words, like, in those kind of misunderstood, words that they're conveying. Like, help us understand, like, how do you see voice as connected to a person's identity, their confidence, and their leadership?
Definitely. And I can, first of all, something that you mentioned before, in your earlier point about the voice being such a powerful
Yeah.
tool for executives, for speakers, and for creators. And something that we've actually been spending a lot of time doing recently has been having chats with some of the world's top TEDx speakers, keynote speakers, executive coaches, and in fact, a conversation we had last week with Julian Treasure, who has like one of the most viewed TEDx
Yeah.
talks
Wow.
of around communication and spoken language. Something that he found really interesting and something that he said was that your voice is your most important instrument, right? I mean, your voice can say "I love you," but it can also start a war, right? I mean, it's really a double-edged sword if you really think about it, and it's a great responsibility in understanding your voice and utilizing it for your intended purpose. And in terms of the current landscape, if you look at just in general, the amount of different metrics that we're tracking and instrumenting. We instrument everything today, almost from sleep, how we're sleeping, our sleeping patterns with technologies like the Aura Ring or Oslo, and these technologies that have kind of popped up in the last 3 to 5 years. We're tracking recovery and strain and your biometric and physiological functions with technologies like Whoop and Apple Health. So why not apply that to something so instrumental and so important as communication, which arguably impacts has the largest impact on how you're going to be perceived and what your outcome is going to be, right? Whether that be in some kind of investor conversation or some kind of pitch or a presentation, a research presentation, right, Raheem? Doing in the life
Yeah.
science space, medical space. So most feedback today is so subjective as well, right? It's be more confident, slow down, but there's no measurable baseline or signal layer that you can actually look back to and understand your unique patterns and communication tendencies. So including, these things that underlie your words, the things like tone and your pace and jitter and shimmer, prosody, which are these mechanical functions of speech, and vocal affect, which is more like intent or emotion behind those words. And those are our two main and core frameworks behind our technology and intelligence layer, is utilizing these speech science principles to understand, well, if two people are saying the same exact sentence, why does one person sound better, or lands better with one person and completely different with another? And those are the types of questions that really excite us. And through this journey, we've been greater understanding, well, what are these very invisible signals that play such a huge role in how you're being perceived to another person.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Do you want to add anything? I mean, he articulated that so beautifully, but I want to make sure we're not leaving anything on the table.
Yeah, I would just add an example that's very common in everyone's lives, which is texting. When we're texting our friends and our family, we often, our words and our emotions get lost in the words. And while transcription of conversation is a very important aspect of our technology, we recognize that a lot of the meaning really is derived from those prosthetic elements that Mikhail mentioned, like frequency, tone, things like that. And in texting, we can use emojis, for example, to try to help convey our emotion, convey how we're feeling. But really, what Noor is trying to accomplish here is giving people a way to interpret that and improve on that using our multimodal model.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That was such a great example because I was going to ask that. It's like it's almost like you're giving people an opportunity to understand like where the emotions are behind their words, and
Exactly.
like, and something that they've never had before. I mean, think about this. This has never been really done before in this way. And technology now allows us to really do this, like what you guys are building, and it's just so remarkable. Like even for myself, like I'm so curious because one of the things that we haven't mentioned yet, and I'm sure you guys are thinking about this, is just even trauma and how trauma affects your voice. Like I
Yes.
think about myself, and my journey to understanding my voice and my power, and trauma played excuse me, a large part of that. And you think about PTSD and trauma survivors, and how they kind of suppress their voice, and their voice has been suppressed, and then learning how to use their voice again. And when their voice cracks, like my sometimes what I do is I'll pause, and I realize like I'm stopping because of something I need to work through, and so like I can understand how powerful this would be for someone who has experienced trauma, and or PTSD or some sort of, traumatic experience that has affected their voice.
Yeah, and that's such an important point because we really do operate within the communication intelligence space, but I definitely see a lot of intersection with neurology, psychology, and those spaces as well, especially because language is so inherent in our brains, but it also is a product of our environment and it really changes depending on the experiences that we've had.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, tell me about this because there's so much power in just self-awareness, kind of like what we've been talking about is just having a lot more awareness of your voice. Like, I just think it can be really transformative for a leader who may have gotten feedback that, hey, you're not talking confidently, or they're getting all these buzzwords that we hear, right? You need to have a lot more executive presence, you need to do this, you need to do that,
Right.
but having a lot more awareness around that, not just words but audibly. Talk to us about like the audible component. Like, how are you guys capturing people's voices, and how are you then like able to showcase like this is how your voice sounds? Like, walk us through that a little bit.
Definitely. And so this really addresses the point of, how does Noor work
Yeah.
practically, right? So we have three main core layers where
Okay.
Noor works in. Layer one being a real-time functionality with your virtual conversations, your Zooms, your Meets, your presentation. Noor can run in the background as a lightweight overlay or companion.
Hmm.
It's analyzing vocal patterns in real time, which, as we mentioned, grounded in speech science, specifically prosody and vocal affect. So these more mechanical functions of speech, but also these more emotional underlying factors as well of the intention behind your words. And so prosody, to go a little bit further into it, is rhythm. Think of it musically, right? It's the musicality of speech. So pacing, pitch variation, emphasis, and vocal affect being how emotion is conveyed through tone, through the word choices you're utilizing, and what you're actually intending to get out of that specific conversation. So, for example, if your pacing spikes under pressure or your tone flattens during a challenge, Noor offers subtle, live, and very private nudges. They're not alarms or corrections. They're very gentle signals to help you regulate in real time. So something like a small slow down cue, or a reminder to breathe, or a reminder to, well, this is landing really well. Like, just bring it on home, like
Oh, I
finish
love
up this
that.
point right now. So these things that, often, and with virtual conversations now, right? I mean, if you look at post-COVID, with so many conversations
Went all the way up.
being it's right, right. And the thing is, something that people actually don't really think about is that Zoom and virtual conversations have essentially transformed human communication patterns. If you think about it, and you've definitely noticed this as well, Demisha, you're in a conversation, people are interrupting each other so much, they're not really letting, turn taking is kind of taking a downhill turn. We're not essentially something we call like mirroring, right? Which is so important in real life conversations as well. Those types of patterns and tendencies are going down. We're also shortening our responses, if you think about it. I mean, we're so used to like these quick, okay, like let's just get to the next point. Let me address
Mm.
this. We're not really conversating or having conversations anymore in the sense that we might have had 10 years ago. So that's something that we're really tackling in the virtual element. And then the other layer, so as I mentioned, there's three layers. Layer two is what we call the intelligence layer, or what's behind the hood or under the hood
Under the
of
hood.
everything, right? So instead of analyzing just one recording, Noor is able to track patterns across different types of contexts and conversations over time. So you actually begin to see these trends as well, how you show up during pushback or during storytelling or conflicts or statistical conversations or more kind of numerical topics and things like that. So we're not optimizing moments, right? We're essentially mapping your presence and how you're showing up across different conversations and contexts on a longitudinal and more long-term, day by day, week by week, month by month basis as well. And another cool and core innovation that we have is this conversational AI companion as well. So someone you can actually just chat with and text either before a meeting or after a meeting. Things you could ask include, did I rush during Q&A, for example, after a call? Or where did I lose steadiness? Where did I kind of lose the audience? Or how did I sound during a very tense moment?
Mhm.
So that's more after the fact, but before conversations as well, kind of getting your head in the game, I like to say, right? And getting to that zone of, well, I'm chatting with Damesha, for example, who has this great podcast, and what are some topics that I should consider, or really which way should I direct the conversation? So getting helpful feedback based off of your own
That's
vocal patterns, right? Because um, that's all in your hands, and that's what we've been analyzing, and then translating that into reflection. And it's not generic advice; it's very personalized and adaptive to each individual user. So it helps you interpret your own personal data.
unbelievable. First, let's just take a moment and give you guys a round of applause for that because this is
Thank you. You're so
incredible.
sweet.
I'm like, I would never say it if I didn't mean it. This is like
I appreciate it.
unreal, unreal what you guys have developed and have tested and put out in the world. I don't even know you that well, and I'm so proud. This is like awesome, because it's like
That's
it
that
gives
means a lot.
I'm so serious. It's like for coaches, like myself, right, who's working with individuals. I work with leaders across different, functions, right? How powerful this is for them. I can hear their tone, their energy. I can kind of explain it, but to have a companion, it almost feels like your own personalized voice coach, like that's along the way with you as you do you, and is like really helping you day to day get better. And that is unbelievable. And I really feel like that's where coaching is going right now. It's like, I think there will still be, because I don't really live in an or world, I live in an and world. And I still think there will be a lot of still one-to-one coaching, like, I do with my clients. And there will also be this, which is so amazing that gives you just all of this data on you. And it's not data that is irrelevant. That's what I find with a
Right.
lot of tools is there's so much irrelevant data that you can't even really apply. This is like personalized to you, to your energy, your rhythm, your word choice, like all of these things, which is just I'm like I said, I'm blown away. I'm blown away. And I know our
Absolutely.
audience is probably, too. Like, who are you targeting right now? Like, are you currently, targeting different like coaches? Are you working with individuals? Like, how does the platform, best serve the individual?
Yes, absolutely. And our core ICP are these high stakes
Mhm.
communicators. So
Okay.
founders, consultants, and executives being our first initial wedge, and people that we really want to support. And that really comes from the idea of, well, where is this going to make the most impact, right? I mean, and if you look at from all the different things, as I mentioned, that we track today, right? From sleep to physiology to all these different types of personal metrics, that actually this core ICP is already used to, right? Getting feedback in this way in the scoring system, receiving these kind of gentle nudges for all of your other kind of activities. So why not add in another layer? It begs the
Yeah.
question. It's such an important layer, right? And
Mhm.
and it's so important for leadership, right? I mean, leadership in general is presence, being present, but under pressure like 24/7, right? And you can have the right strategy, but if your tone is communicating tension, people really feel that, right? I mean, your nervous system walks into the room before you actually do or your words actually do. And most leaders are comfortable getting feedback on all these other different metrics. And but since there's none that's really structured in a way for your presence or your spoken language skills or your communication skills, it sits right in there to be very seamlessly integrated across these very high stakes conversations for these professionals. And another thing you
Mhm.
mentioned before, something I wanted to address was that Noor absolutely, does augment this coaching experience, this traditional coaching experience. So we're not in the business of taking away clients or taking away jobs from actual voice coaches or executive coaches, but this is a layer that can completely support, right, your actual coaching. Because right now technology, there's no way we could actually replicate, you know besides being a reflective and instrumentation layer and surfacing these patterns, and then but and giving you these live nudges, for example, and kind of tracking these metrics across time. But technology today, we don't see it replacing the need for coaches or voice coaches, because that actually then synthesizing and then the so what component, right? I mean, that's very much needed to be in the hands of actual voice coaches and executive coaches to use this as an instrument or a tool for them to support their actual processes.
Yes, I could not agree more. I really do see this as such a great partner for coaches, along with those high stake communicators. But then also, like I said, just people communicating, having that have difficult relationships. You think about like communicating in a marriage, how
Right.
the people really just want to be heard. So whether they're high stake communicators, whether they're in their personal relationship, they really want to be seen and heard. And so, but the ownership of communication is with the communicator at that moment. And so it then switches when the next person is communicating. They now own the communication. And so I have seen this even within my own relationships, right? Like when I've been in a relationship, it's like when there's a tense moment, it's like we're talking over each other, we're, not listening, and you're using words that when you were more regulated, you wouldn't necessarily use, and so it's just
Exactly.
so amazing to when I think about just where Noor can go and all the, ways that it can be used. And, it's not just professional, but personal. And so it's just really powerful. Something I wanted to talk about is, and I seen this a lot, especially with people of color, is code switching. And they are in maybe a meeting and they're code switching and kind of shrinking themselves, like filtering their voices to kind of fit the environment that they're in. How can tools like Mirror, kind of empower individuals to own their authentic expression without compromising professional, impact, if you will?
That's such an important question, especially considering our backgrounds as well. So we are also people of color, and I find that Makaeel is much better at code switching than I am, especially because yeah, especially because he has a stronger background with our roots in South Asia. But I definitely see that in that same vein, there's a role for Noor to play in people who are new to the job market. So something that I've found in my research is that in this job market, people are able to get their foot through the door, but they may come from first generation backgrounds like we do, or maybe English isn't their first language, and they're struggling to keep up in the workplace, or they're struggling to really make themselves not necessarily fit in, but be impressionable while also, like you mentioned, not shrinking themselves. So I definitely see a role in our AI algorithm in addressing that need specifically and making sure, like you said, that people aren't diminishing themselves or diminishing their thoughts, because they might be better communicators or more confident communicators in their native language or in their casual communication patterns. But being able to then translate that to like a professional workplace is also such an important skill and something that Noor can help them improve on.
Yes.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think it really goes back to understanding, why is communication today breaking down so much? And it really points to the fact that we're communicating more than ever, right? I mean, it's so accessible now to just hop on a Zoom call or hop on a meeting or meet somebody out for lunch or coffee. But we're reflecting less than ever at the same time. And that's why a lot of the issue is that we are losing our authenticity, and authenticity is under pressure in a way, right? People are so hyper aware of being watched that it kind of creates a performance, and you're not able to feel comfortable in your own skin
Mhm.
sometimes because you're so hyper fixated on, well, should I be saying this? How should I be saying it? And things like that. But the thing is with awareness platforms like Noor, when they're designed correctly, they can actually deepen this authenticity, right? Because as people can actually notice when they're not aligned or where that internal state and external state there's a mismatch, that can help you then truly understand where are things breaking down. And then from there, I mean, naturally, you're more confident because once you can define the specific pattern or specific tendency that you have, you can actually do something about it, right? So this congruence builds trust much faster than pure charisma or kind of code switching for the environment ever would, if you're just very comfortable in your own skin.
Yes. And I love that. Thank you so much for talking about that because that was a question I for sure wanted to ask you, because I've seen this firsthand as a people leader working in tech and how many people code switch during interviews, during, meetings and even just at the water cooler,
Yeah,
because they are trying to fit in and they want to not, bridge the gap. And I actually think, one of the things that I always look for when I'm hiring people is a culture addition, not just a culture fit, but somebody who can add to the culture and bring their selves, their whole selves, that's what makes a company great because not all of our clients, that you're serving are the same. They're all different. And so like your organization should match your clients, and so I love that you're giving that power to the individuals, especially, you know, individuals that are not as comfortable like being themselves.
right.
One thing I wanted to ask you is like, and maybe you already talked about this, but one thing I notice is like inflection, of voice, right? And so is that something that you guys are recording as well? Like, because people, I always, when I know that they're not being their authentic self, so either go really high or they'll fade away. So, like, are you also recording that as well?
Yeah, so our intelligence layer works very hand in hand in parallel by analyzing both transcriptual elements, so words and ums and likes, these kind of filler words, but also those acoustic features, like you mentioned,
Right.
those inflection points, high pitch or low pitch, speaking louder in certain moments or rushing in certain moments, not breathing enough, speaking too
Yep.
fast, for example. So we're actually, our core innovation has been being able to ingest both of these layers simultaneously and helping you map, from each word to each kind of acoustic measure, things like jitter and shimmer and all these buzzwords that I could kind of go on and on about, that make up these acoustic features as well. That is
Mhm.
part of our core intelligence layer, and backed by machine learning validation on the back end. So a lot of what we do, since we are both scientists, it's very data backed and science backed in the types of practices that we utilize in ingesting these speech features.
Wow, my gosh. Thank you so much for walking me through that. And this just feels like so much more than, a platform that's, communication analytics, like it's just so much bigger than that. Like it's almost feels like, your own personal growth, your own personal voice growth, but your confidence, as well, and even healing, like because there's again going back to what I was saying earlier about just trauma, we all experience trauma in some form, right? Like whether it's, inflicted, self-inflicted or, inflicted from someone else. Um, and so like I just imagine how powerful this is for the individual, and how healing it is to be able to understand themselves in a way that they've never been able to measure themselves.
Yeah, there's a really interesting
Definitely.
book actually that I read called The Dictionary of Body Language by
Ooh,
Joe Navarro.
okay.
And it was something that I had thought about a lot while we were crafting the idea of Noor. And it was written by a former FBI agent. And he was basically chronicling some nonverbal and verbal cues that he picked up on while meeting people in his career. And there's a very interesting chapter about the voice and the mouth and how we can learn a lot by like things like you mentioned, like inflection, and how that relates to how people might be feeling inside.
Yes. Oh my goodness. This is so cool. Like looking ahead, how do you envision this incredible platform shaping just the future of leadership, creativity, and self-expression?
Yeah, and I think, something that I really want listeners to take away and users to take away is actually reflecting back, right? I mean, to a time where they were in a high stakes conversation and how they actually felt, right, on that drive home, on the kind of like breakdown, like on like at home when you're kind of talking to your friend about this chat you had with your manager or your colleague and understanding, like, I mean, did you ask yourself, what was I present? Was I aligned? Was I regulated? So our long-term vision is just making people more aware of these types of things, right? And we call Noor a mirror for your voice because, like a mirror, I mean, you're reflected back, what you're seeing. So similarly here, we're reflecting back what you're hearing in real time, and then of course across days and weeks and months as well. And just having that gut check in a way, right? Of having a companion that's always by your side when you need it, when you need those kinds of subtle suggestions or nudges, and utilizing it to better understand yourself first and foremost.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'd love to also share with the audience that we drew the name Nur from the Arabic word meaning light or illumination. And something that we like to say is that we really like to illuminate and shed light on some of these vocal patterns and skills that people can improve on. And an example I can share as a vision I see for the product really is, for example, after an interview or after a presentation, I always found myself asking, well, I really hope that went well, or I really hope they liked what I had to say. And I think that when people use Noor, they'll really find that after using the software and analyzing their vocal patterns, they'll leave that presentation or interview not really questioning how they came across. They'll be confident that they were able to be perceived the way they wanted to.
Yes. Oh my gosh, this gave me chills. Thank you so much for that. Oh my goodness. Well, one thing that I want to just piggyback on when you talk about it being a mirror, it is so powerful because when we think about all communication relationships, right? Any relationship that you're in, professional or personal, you
Mm.
hear people saying that it's a mirror, but the challenge that I have seen is if people's inner mirrors are not clean, then you're not going to get a very good reflection of yourself. And so a lot of
Yes,
times
very well said.
yeah, a lot of times their inner mirrors are projections of what they're going through. What I love about your platform is that it's giving people a clear mirror of their voice. And so I thank you for the work that you're doing. I am so excited. I know you know that I'm excited about this and so excited to partner with you guys.
Thank
Like,
you.
very excited about this. So thank you for blessing Sunday Soul Day coming on. Everyone, please get on this platform. Follow you. Where can people find you guys? Like if they want to connect with you, tell me a little bit about where's the best way to connect.
Sure. So we're very active on Instagram at mynewer_AI. And Makaeel and I also post our own videos talking about speech science and our work at our page at the Noor Signal.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. And everyone, as always, have an amazing Sunday. And do us a favor, leave your favorite part about this conversation or something new that you learned in the comments below. And have an amazing Sunday. Bye.